We're going to jump into our next session, which is Earning Attention with Audio, an Amplified Intelligence Attention Study. So can you please welcome to the stage Karen Nelsonfield, founder and CEO of Founder Intelligence.
Right.
We'll go together.
You're a hard act to follow. Oh, thank you. So, Joel, Abby, Carl, Kate, and I'm a statistician. So how does one follow that? I'm just going to have to drop a few F-bombs here and there, and no, I won't do that. That's the other academic. So welcome today to hear about our first radio, visual or audio attention measurement findings. So if anyone knows anything about the business that we're in, we're an audience measurement company that collects data from 13, 14 countries now, and but has largely done it in the visual way. And then we translate that data. So my original PhD is audience measurement. Again, boring. And we essentially turn facial footage and gaze-based footage into attention-based metrics that can be used to equalise the error that's underpinning the digital ecosystem at the moment. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I want to talk to you a little bit about framing the problem and what we're actually dealing with, and why I left the university to actually pursue the work we're doing. But then I want to talk to you about different media and how we're actually translating that and how audio fits in. Because, visual attention's where we started, but that's certainly not where we're going to end, because we recognise that there's a lot more to attention than just actually seeing something. In fact, the definition of attention is about paying concentrated awareness to one single thing at one moment in time while trying to filter anything out. And that doesn't necessarily only mean visual. So let's try and start and frame the problem. So we were acutely reminded recently that reach is the basic premise to grand growth. If anyone knows my history, I actually did my PhD at Ehrenberg Bass. So of all people, I kind of get the idea of penetration leads to brand growth. But the problem with using reach as the basic premise or true north is that the basics are broken. And this is not any fault of your own. Let me explain. So what we actually know, and this is coming from a lot of the work we've done on the digital space, if reach-based planning worked, each impression, so every time an ad went to air, you would get 100% volume of people's attention. And what that means is, time in view is clicking away, and 100% of the impressions that you buy would have 100% of the attention of the audience. And that's not the case at all. In fact, this is a good example of the reality. In this sort of scenario, about 44% of the reach volume that you actually buy have someone look straight at the ad. And that's pretty scary, right? And it gets worse. So this can change by platform and format. And scrolling makes a difference, and all the functionality of the different platforms makes a difference. So in this case, of all the impressions you buy, about 20% of the time the audience is looking. And they kind of look really early on, and then they scroll away really fast, so the decay is really steep. And the problem with that is that, instead of buying 100% of 100% of time, it's a bit of potluck around, the type of volume that you're getting behind the pipes, if you like. So, and when it's different by platform and format, it's really difficult to equalise the error. If the error was consistent and we knew the shape of the distribution of the decay, we could actually go, okay, well, we have to index it and fix reach so that every time you buy 1,000 impressions, it's equal to 1,000 impressions on that platform. But it's not. And this is why this happens. So, in fact, we don't pay concentrated, sustained awareness to ads. I mean, that's obviously a no-brainer. But when people think about the compound effects of this, it's actually quite interesting. So what we do is we collect attention through visual cameras, and we translate it into active, passive, and non-attention. And active attention is when you're directly looking at the screen and the ad. These people are paying passive attention because they're dual screening. And passive attention is when you're near to the ad. I'm the ad. They're paying passive attention. Still haven't worked it out. And then there's non-attention, which is they're not looking at all. So we switch in and out of active and passive constantly. 1 minute we're looking at the ad, then we're reading the feed, and then we're talking to our cat, and then we're looking at the animal. That'd be the ad. Then we look back at the animal. I'm a cat person, by the way. But this is in contrast to how time in view behaves. So time in view is a counter of engagement, right? But actually there's lots of gaps that sit across time in view, because half the time, in fact, more than half the time, I'll explain, no one's actually looking at that ad, but the time in view clock is going. I'll get to why this is important. This is actually a piece of recent work that we did, that we pulled a random 60,000 ads from some of the data. We have a lot of data. And what we can see when you actually look at the relationship between time in view and human attention, it sits at around 0.3. Now, what that means is about 1 in 3 chance that when you pay for 6 seconds or 7 seconds or 8 seconds of time, someone's actually looking. So if you had the opportunity to make an investment at a 1 in 3 chance that it'll work, would you do it? Probably not. So we actually repeated that study 28 times just to make sure that we weren't, making it up in different countries. And the reality is time in view and human attention are definitely not related. And nor is time in view and actual outcomes. And this is why, because people are switching in and out, and the result of that is a lot of the time you're not actually looking at the ad, but you're paying for that. So the outcome of that error, so time in view is the underlying independent variable. The outcome of that is this whole concept of viewability. So it's getting a bit of a raw deal at the moment. Lots of people are talking about viewability failing, but it's failing not because the concept's not right, because bringing some sort of standard into digital world is actually quite sensible because it was quite unregulated and unruly. But bringing 2 seconds of time and 50% pixels, the timepiece is the issue, because 1 in 3, those 2 seconds will not be 2 seconds. So there's a lot of error that sits underneath MRC accredited views, because I think it's about 75% of MRC accredited views get no human attention at all, which aligns to what I showed you with the time in view thing. So this is what we're solving for as a business. And this is also why there's a lot of flow-on effects from this error, because, cost per completed view or any completion level metrics that go into any of your systems, models, MMMs, strategies will fail you because this concept of completion is not solid, right? And again, this is not your fault. This is the fact that the pipes let you down. And this happens because, just quickly, we used to measure humans. I heard earlier from the other statisticians that it was the survey-based kind of metric. And when I was younger, that's exactly what we did. We used to measure outward. We used to measure humans, albeit the surveys were pretty basic and pretty arbitrary. But we at least measured humans. Now we only measure metadata, and we make assumptions on that metadata if a human's paid any attention or not. So let's just quickly talk about how we personally collect it. Then I want to talk about how we have actually sort of extended it into audio. So we built technology, we've been doing this now for 6 years, that's designed for scaled audience measurement. I admit it's not neuroscience. I can't tell you what you're thinking, but I can certainly tell what you're looking at. And that's important because when you're trying to fix an audience measurement industry, you need scaled data. So what we do is we do attention with gaze. That's the one you've heard about all the time. So we intercept cameras on mobile phones, GDPR compliant, and we actually film people while they're using the phone, and we also collect the data behind it, and we can pull out active, passive, and non-attention in that way. So gaze tracking's when the camera is close because it can tell where your eyes are. You get done. Then we have facial recognition. So when we use channels that are further away, you need to adjust the math because you can't see people's pupils, right, from a long distance. So anything that's further away, you have to change the math. So we still collect facial footage, so we still film people, but the math is based on your facial trajectory and your geometry and where you're looking and how the likelihood of you looking at the TV or not, the likelihood of whether you're dual screening or not. And then we've just extended it to cinema. And cinema is the same. So it's, again, facial footage, but it's much further away again. So the math just changes in terms of the likelihood of someone viewing. And then we've just done outsource. We've just dropped that in the last couple of days. And what you can see from this one is that we've actually now introduced pose tracking. How cool is that? So that we can tell if you're a dog or not. And if you're a dog, you probably won't get counted as a view. But firstly, we work out whether you're a human, and then we kind of draw in on the facial recognition. So all of these are visual aids, right? And we take this really seriously because, you know, a lot of us come from academic stock, so we're very fussy about the mathematical values that sit behind this omni-channel measurement. So TV, we've done PC before, you know, mobile, cinema, and outdoor. But what about audio? What we do know, and in fact from some studies that we've done in Sydney from a long way back, is that audio does actually play a role in attention. I'm not surprised. So, you know, it's often audio that kind of connects the dots between passive attention and active attention. So we know the relationship between attention and outcomes is solid. So how do we then translate what we know in the visual sense to audio? Because we're not filming people, right? So we tried this once before in the UK and the US, but this is the first time we've done it in radio. What we know is if we know what the outcomes are, we can actually, because we have so much data, this is a big word, we can reverse the coefficients to predict how much attention someone pays. Is it perfect? No. Are we seeing consistencies? Yes. So there's something in it that we can actually do, and that's what we tried to do. So Joe and Ford allowed us to sort of go into market in Australia and World First Radio and actually sort of collect a whole lot of data through our app. So people will download our app and then they choose which particular network and which particular program they go to, but it's all populated with different ads. So we know if someone's heard it or not. Obviously we don't need to film them because they're not watching it. And then we send them to a virtual store straight after. So it's the results of this virtual store that we can then reverse out and make some predictions on how much attention is paid. Now today's not here to kind of overkill the results, so I'm only going to talk a little bit about, I think that's the same slide, I think that's duplicated. We're going to talk a little bit about the results without going into too much detail, because I think there's a press release coming. But what we know is, the good news is that radio works. Did you know that I worked for Triple M in my 20s? I am one of you, just saying. So I know all about the passion of radio. I know all about how engaging it is, you know, and all of the talent, although I think half the talent when I was dead now, but that's another story. I was young. So live radio advertising increases brand choice by 20%. Basically what that means is the overall uplift from a baseline, a collected non-exposed baseline, is about 20%. So we call that short-term advertising strength. And to give it context, you know, it sits in around about the point of quality video. So social feeds sit below that. I never reveal actual numbers publicly, but social feeds generally sit below that, and television sits above that. So it sort of sits in the middle. And that's what I expect. And we've now repeated this quite a few times, so we're very comfortable that the results will be consistent. What we do see is that there are differences at the category level, and that's probably no surprise, because some categories are a lot, and this is where creative plays a role. So some categories are a lot more boring, some categories are a lot more fun. Not suggesting finance is boring, actually I am. But I think the important piece is that none of this is unexpected to us, and how we can then populate it into planning tools in the new year. I'm very comfortable that we'll be able to make some predictions with upper and lower bounds around how many seconds of attention someone pays. So just to sort of finish off, we know that radio sits between social, quality online video in terms of seconds, so this is good news, right? But there are some format differences underneath, so we don't reveal those here, but that's exactly the same for any of the other work we've done. So Facebook have feed, watch, reels, whatever else, their stories, and each of those formats actually have a different range of attention that it can afford you, and it's no different. So formats underneath do play a role, and you'd have to expect that because it's context and it's demographics and it's interest. But I will say, one thing we have sort of seen in here is branding makes more of a difference on radio than it does I guess, in some of the visual stuff we've seen. And I think that's because you're not looking at it and you're not visually, even peripherally looking at it. So you can't see a red can in the side here branding is so much more important. And when it works, it really works. So just be mindful that your branding has to be really distinctive. So any jingles or audio tracks that are really connected to your category or your brand, make sure you integrate them. And there's more work to be done. So, I'm all about generalizability. We've seen now it run several times, and I'm feeling very comfortable where it generally sits, but there is more work to be done. I threw this one in because the data that we've seen here does actually fit in what we know about a typical attention hierarchy. I see this over and over and over again, regardless of the platform, that the platform essentially, which is the core reason why you pay attention or not, plays the biggest role. The format is the next piece, context, demographic, and creative. And I get a lot of people say, and I don't want to spend another 10 minutes on it, but a lot of people say, what are you talking about? Creative doesn't play the biggest role. It absolutely doesn't. Creative is super important to drive people to a sale, but at the end of the day, it's tempered by the performance of the platform. So you can't get a lot of attention if the platform is not built to allow you to pay attention. So some good news is that we have a attention optimizer which is about to drop internationally in about a month's time. We've been selling this data for a while, but it's actually being built into a UX that optimises outcomes, and we are going to include this data in Q1 next year, so we feel very comfortable about it. So there is our translating visual attention into audio attention. But bear in mind, and I know that Jo probably asked me because she's about to come up on stage with me, there's always trade-offs. Right, always trade-offs. So think about reach, cost, and quality. Attention, which equalises the issues around reach, is important, but there's always sort of these three things that you need to think about when you're planning your media. So I think that's all I wanted to talk about, Jo.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was so interesting, and what amazing results.
Was it fun, though?
It was fun?
Excellent.
Very entertaining. Thank you so much, Karen. You should be on air. So tell me, with those results, so 120 STAS score and a 20% brand uplift, is that what you were expecting from radio? Is that what you kind of planned, like thinking that would be the outcome?
Oh, 100%. I mean, like I said, I've worked in it, so I do understand it's an
it works?
Yeah, well, yeah. And I know it's an immersive experience, and 100%, the biggest factor in attention is the functionality of the platform. So when you've got something that you're kind of really connected to and really engaged in, so I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah. We've had a bit of a chat today about podcasting. Where is that sitting in terms of your plans moving forward?
Yeah, well, we've done a little bit, but I don't have enough data to sort of, sorry, Abby, to kind of really be definitive about it. But, to be honest, all educated guess would suggest that it sits well.
Yeah, yes, you would think so. So on the horizon for hopefully sometime next year?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think another thing on creative, I mean, it's I guess the creative in different formats, in different mediums, plays a big role regardless. So within attention though, you saw a real diversity in terms of that's a really bad creative, it is not working, the results are being pulled right down?
What's interesting about that, without going into extreme detail, is that's unusual for platforms. So what we normally see is there's a much smaller range between the lowest performing and the highest performing, and that's often because you can scroll away or you can skip or whatever. But I did actually see quite a lot of variation between the worst creative and the best. So that suggests to me that the range of opportunity is wider. That's good news for creative. But that's again why I say make sure that you don't play it safe and that your audio is really distinctive in terms of its assets and things like that.
So more important though for audio or for other mediums, I guess creative in general is important. You've got to have a good ad to make people look at your ad and act upon it.
Well, that's the key, right? So I can lead you to attention and tell you where in the ecosystem you can find it. But if you don't have an ad that leads you to a brand, then it fails, and I can't, and that's why we don't see that attention and outcomes are perfectly linearly related, because if it's poorly branded, I mean, you know, it's complicated.
Yeah, oh, fair enough. I can imagine it is. So you talked a little bit about the context of the 120 or the 20% in terms. Where does that sitting in terms of the other mediums that you've researched?
Oh my gosh, I can't tell you everything.
Come on, Karen. No one will tell anybody.
I'm comfortable that, like I publicly said,
Yes.
it sits above kind of the social feed kind of piece, and I look at it as more of a quality video level. That's
Yep,
kind of what I
yep,
would see
which
it
is
at.
good.
So certainly not programmatic,
No.
and certainly kind of in the middle somewhere.
And does a really good job for branding as well then in terms of the uplift of 20%. That gives you the good result.
Well, that's an average, so you can do better and you can do worse.
Do better. If your creative is better, you can do better. So it sounds like we need to talk to creative.
I'm actually quite comfortable, and we've had this conversation. I'm quite comfortable. This is not the first time I've seen this result. Obviously, we've been doing work with you for a while, so I'm really comfortable that it's starting to become a bit generalisable. And I'm very comfortable to put it into attention plan next year with upper and lower bounds.
Fabulous. So the new version of Attention Planner next year, what's different about that?
So, you know, for the first 3 years of my business, you know, I've left the university to see whether I could fix a broken ecosystem. The first 3 years of my business was to make sure that I didn't do a disservice to the industry. So what I did was I wanted to understand whether attention was valuable and whether it was different. So, or was I just selling something a lot of the same rubbish, right? So my point being that we've only been commercialising actually for 2 years, and the first iteration of Plan was basically a data feed. So here's all the numbers, and people went, oh my God, how do I even deal with that? So the next version is essentially a true optimization tool, which allows you to sort of see how much attention is being paid to big and small brands and what you're likely to get from outcomes and things like that, and incorporating reach curves and decay curves and all sorts of things. So it's it's the same data fueling it, but it's the use case versus an academic just going, here's some data.
And you've been overseas lately.
Yes.
Have you been taking that product overseas to share it with them, and what's been the reaction?
Well, we're quite fortunate that it had a big take-up at the beginning. I mean, actually, Australia in particular, all the holding co's here have our data API'd into their systems anyway. Yeah, it was just kind of showcasing, because there's other products that follow, so verification tools and things like that. So last week I was presenting in Adweek, New York, so it wasn't technically a product roadshow. It was me sort of talking about the industry and where it's going.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. So I guess your platform will evolve as more data becomes available, if different metrics come in.
Yeah, actually, no. So
We're done.
yes and no. So what's interesting, just to put your mind at rest, because we've been doing this for so long, we were just talking, I think, to Steve earlier. So the reason why I'm comfortable to go to market with it is because the data is relatively stable, other than a few minor changes every time somebody might make a change to a format. So the data is not that dynamic that it will drastically change every time you optimize a plan. But what will change are the features within it that help advertisers optimize and trade and verify attention. But the actual data is quite stable now, so we refresh it constantly.
So I guess it's not just for advertisers in terms of buying. You could also take the learnings from the creative part of it, for example, make better ads to try and get more attention. So if you're not getting great attention, how do you get more attention?
So that's really difficult, which is what I was talking about with this range before. So on a lot of the sort of lower attention visual type platforms, you can't.
It's just not possible.
It doesn't. So there's a range that you have to work within, and by the nature of the fact that you can scroll or not listen or all that sort of stuff, you can't actually get more attention. So, and we see that because on platform A you might get 8 seconds, the same ad on platform B might get 6, and then 5, and then 3, and then 0. And if creative was the dominant force of attention, you'd get the same amount of attention across all platforms, and you don't. So I think that's an interesting point with radio, because what we've seen here is there is a lot more of a range that people can optimise towards from creative, but a lot of the time you can't do that on other platforms.
So looking also then, I guess, at different times of the day, different levels of attention, is that what you're looking at as well?
So I'm sure you'll release those findings at a point, but we definitely, had a look across the day parts and by demographic. We also had a look at where you actually viewed or listened, etc.
Yep.
And interesting because Joel was talking about how he's lonely in his house doing his work. I see that in the data.
You see Joel in the
Yeah, I
data?
see Joel in the data because we can see that a lot of people really engage in their home actually while they're.
And probably brought on because of COVID as well. So when I think the numbers we had that before, when people went into lockdown, they were actually listening to more radio. When the no surveys were out there, the question was, does that mean no one's listening? And then the surveys came back and the results were great and people were listening probably more than ever during COVID. And I guess that's the Joel thing, working at home with some company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We're just about done. Does anybody have any questions in the audience? This is your one-time opportunity to ask Karen Nelson-Field a question around...
Sorry, I'm not Abby.
Any attention? Any questions? Come on. Come on, jump on out.
They're all nervous. I can be mean.
No, she's not. She's lovely. Absolutely lovely to work with. Well, that might be us then. If you already, Karen will be here for a little bit longer. It's out there. So if you want to ask her a question later, or come and see myself or Ford from NLS from SCRA, we'll be more than happy to have a chat to you about it. Karen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That
It's
was
been fun.
amazing. Fantastic.
Thanks, team.
Thank you.